I had a dream last night that I was working as a musician in a rave club. Well, even though it was a dream, it really happened. I worked for quite a few years in the Toronto club rave scene as a live musician. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Tim Conley Drums. So as I just mentioned, I had a dream last night that I was working as a musician, performing in various rave clubs in Toronto. And even though it was a dream, I actually did that. Back in the 90s, late 90s, I think I started doing it around 97 or 98, and I did it for several years when the rave scene in Toronto was peaking, and it was massive. It was a massive scene. We would play to crowds of thousands of people. Some of these clubs were absolutely massive. Now, I know there's going to be guys that are going to remember these names. I'm going to give you guys a bunch of names of various clubs that I either used to play at or in some cases attend, depending on, I didn't really go to raves personally other than working as a musician. I think I only attended maybe 3 in my entire life, but I worked many, and I'll explain the whole thing in a minute here, but I'm just going to throw some names out to you. So some of the popular clubs back in the day, in the late 90s and early 2000s, and even into the mid 2000s, were Tonic, G-Spot, This Is London, Turbo, System Soundbar, Privilege, Comfort Zone, The Government, System. There were just Limelight, Easy on the Fifth, Money Club, Mezzana, Amnesia, Elbow Room, Cafe Revolution. These were all the hot clubs at the time. Now, not every single one of those, like Easy on the Fifth, for example, was not a designated rave club, but sometimes people would turn it into that, just being in the club, but it wasn't a designated rave club. Like The Government and Comfort Zone, those were designated rave clubs. And how it worked was oftentimes they would have a DJ, of course, running those beats and playing what was called house music. I don't even know if house music exists anymore because music has evolved since then, obviously. We're talking 28, 27 years ago. So they would play this music, but they would also have live bands on occasion, especially the Comfort Zone on a Sunday night. That's when I used to gig there. And it would be myself, a bass player, a keyboard player, and a guy scratching records. There'd be no guitar player, no horns, no singing. It was just, we would play club music, and the way that it was set up was that in most cases, we weren't even seen by the audience. We were like the sound system. We weren't on stage. Some places we were on stage, some places because they actually had a stage, but most times we were off somewhere in the background. The audience didn't even see us. A lot of people didn't even realize it was a band playing. That was the funny part. They didn't even realize they were listening to live music. Now, I was not using electronic drums. They weren't really a huge thing at the time in terms of drum sets. I was still playing acoustic drums, but what I would do is I would mic the bass drum in a certain particular way that would give it that electronic feel. I would also put a tiny little splash cymbal taped down to the snare to give it that electric sound so that nobody realized that it was an acoustic drum kit. It sounded like a club electronic kit, the way that I altered the drum kit, the way that I mic'd it. And I had a mic on the top and a mic on the bottom, and it was super tight. I would really tighten the heads up. Then I would tape that cymbal down, and it gave it a tsh, tsh, that electric club sound that is popular. So Acoustic drums turned into an electronic kit. The people in the club didn't even realize half the time that there was a band playing. Now, sometimes people would come to the club on a Sunday night because of the band, which was great. They actually knew, and they were here, at the club to see a live band, or not even see sometimes. It would mainly be just hear us play. Now, I got to tell you, and I was talking to my wife about this morning before I did this video. I was making decent bread on those gigs. Like, I could live off of the money that I was making just doing those gigs. If I was doing them, 4 or 5 nights a week, I could have lived off the money. It was good money. Now, I wasn't doing these gigs that often. So obviously I was teaching, I was doing other shows, I was performing, doing whatever. This was just one thing that I did at the time, but it was one of the best paying gigs. At the time, I was making good money doing wedding gigs, and I was making good money doing these rave club gigs. Now, I know what you're thinking. If you're in a rave club and you're performing, you must be doing the drugs too. Well, everybody was doing the drugs except for the band. I never once took ecstasy while I was performing. Never once. Well, I never took ecstasy, period. But I never once took it while I was performing, and neither did my bandmates. We were the only, us and the DJ, well, I'm guessing probably the DJ was high too. I don't know. But we, at least the band, I can concur for sure that we were just there, and it was a job. And we weren't getting high. We weren't doing the drugs. But I don't know if you guys remember the Comfort Zone, but I can remember playing there. And they had this area when you first walked in that had all these chairs and loungers and couches. And I can remember playing, and people would be on all these loungers and stuff. Now, I couldn't really see them that well from where I was actually performing from, because it was in a different part of the club. A lot of these clubs were like warehouses converted into dance club. That's how they could fit, 1,000, 1,500 people into these places. The Comfort Zone, I can't remember the capacity. I just remember it was pretty big, and I remember these couches. Anyways, I can remember the DJ would start off, and anytime we took a break, the DJ would take over. And the funny thing is, like I said, nobody ever noticed the difference unless they specifically knew that there was a band playing live. And I would say 98% of the crowd did not know there was a band playing live. It was a funny thing because they couldn't see a band. They were in a club and they heard music, and they just thought that it was a DJ spinning the whole time. But the DJ only spun at the very beginning of the night and when we were done at the end of the night. So what would happen is these people would come in, of course the crowd would come in, and they were all doing ecstasy. It was the thing. And then the first part of taking ecstasy that I witnessed was everybody would get really sleepy. So they'd all sit in these chairs and these couches, and they'd all pass out in these couches. And I remember laughing, thinking, what the hell kind of a dance club is this when all these young people show up and they all fall asleep? Is it an old folks home dance club? Like, what the hell is this? Anyways, that was the first part of the drug. It would knock you out. So, if I'm not mistaken, ecstasy has 4 different drugs in it, and you cycle through it as the drug releases into your system. So, these people are all passed out, and then the music would start, and it would start slowly and build, and then you'd see them slowly start coming around. And of course the beats, I'm going to be honest, drumming wise, it was pretty lame. It was it was certainly not what I would really want to be playing musically. It was not challenging. It did help me with my offbeat feel. And I developed an amazing offbeat feel. And like I said, nobody could tell that it wasn't a a drum machine. They had no idea that it was a live drummer. Now, I have to confess, it was around this time that I first started playing live with a click, because we had to have these, because it's house music, it had to sound like it was a machine. I had to sound like a machine, so to speak. So we would play these gigs to a click, and this was my first gigs playing with a click live. I'd played with a click doing some studio stuff, of course, but this was live. So about 97, 98 was when I started doing the live shows with a click. So anyways, we would start playing, and all of a sudden these people, they were like zombies. They would rise up and they'd hear the music, and then they would feel it, and then before you know it, they would all be up completely opposite to what they just were, completely energized, and they'd all be going crazy and dancing, and then that would carry on for hours and hours. And it was an amazing gig in one sense. Morally, not my finest hour, because I was playing to druggies, basically. I was playing in, I don't know how they got licensed for this. I don't understand any of the politics of the licensing or whatever, but everybody was doing these drugs, and we were just providing the music. I was making good money, and people are going to do what they're going to do, you know? So I actually enjoyed the gigs. It was fun. Getting thousands of people to move and dance, and I just tried to forget about the drug thing and just did my thing, which was to perform. And I did this for quite some time in Toronto, and I did it in several different bands, not just in one band. I did it in several different bands, and I kind of got known for it a little bit in the scene, in terms of the downtown core musician scene. And I would get asked to sub in. Now, subbing, I'm going to be honest, was the easiest subbing I ever did, because it's all the same beat. And there was three elements to the beat: the bass drum, and it was almost always that beat. Occasionally, I would alter it, just because I couldn't stand going all night. The other thing was the offbeat hi-hat. Sometimes it would be eighth notes, sometimes it would be 16th notes, but there was always this offbeat sound. It was never on the beat. It was almost always an offbeat type of hi-hat thing. And then, of course, the big drum fill that leads to the explosion. You know, the boom, and then it would hit. And the whole place would boom when we would hit, you know? And the keyboardist would come. I mean, it was heavy keyboard music. He was you know, really, really cranking out that whole house music, 90s dance feel. We used to play house. We used to play a lot of 90s dance, but no vocals. And the crowd loved it. And like I said, those are the three things I did. Of course, you know, just playing a groove. You had to be tight, though. You had to be really tight to that click, because the groove had to sound robotic. I'm going to be totally honest. I wasn't really breathing a lot of life into it. I mean, it was a human being playing, but I was playing with that click, and I was ultra tight to that click because I had to be, because that's what the music
now if you
demanded.
put everything aside on these gigs, I have to admit that when you have 1,500, 2,000 people all dancing and dropping at the same time, because like I said about that big buildup, and everybody would drop at the same time, there's an amazing thrill being a musician when the whole crowd is with you. And that was the good thing about this gig musically, was the crowd never stopped dancing. Every single person, even the DJ and the people serving the drinks, they were all dancing right along with us when we were playing. So the gigs were insane. It was absolute madness of constant, like we never even stopped. Often we would go from one song right into the next, or we would bring it right down dynamically. And you'd see the crowd drop. They would drop, the crowd, you know, they would feel the dynamics. And then we'd bring the dynamics up, and then there'd be that big drum fill, then the drop, and then chaos and madness. It was a lot of fun. I have to admit that. there were some nights where the crowd discovered us. if you can understand what I mean. They actually found out, you got to be kidding me. There was a band, that was a live band playing, and they would freak out. And suddenly they would come up to us and we were like celebrities in that club scene world. And when we would go through the crowd, people would be patting us on the back. And one thing about this culture is I'm not a drug user in any way, shape, or form. If you've ever watched any of my videos, I talk about this vehemently. I don't drink. I've never used drugs. But people that are using these type of drugs, it's a very loving thing. It's all about hugs and kisses and dancing, and there was never a fight. That's another thing. There was never a fight. I never saw any violence at these gigs. So very different than an alcohol-induced club gig where I used to see fights constantly. At these gigs, no violence. It was more of a much more loving environment, and people were, they would always crowd in together, and there was all this touching, and it was weird. That part of it was weird, especially when you're not mentally in the same state as them, when you're observing from afar. It was a weird scene, man. But like I said, it was insane, but I did have fun and became a little bit of a celebrity in that scene back in the day. And like I said, morally, not my finest moment, but it paid the bills for me and I got gigs. And like I said, I got known in the Toronto scene as a musician, not as a club goer by any means, but people knew me and they would hire me. Hey, we're doing a gig at the Government tonight. We're doing a gig at G-Spot. We're doing a gig at wherever. This is London, and we need somebody to come in. And as I mentioned, it was an easy gig because basically all the songs were the same. If you listen to club music, it's almost all the same. Maybe the keyboard changes a little bit, but the drum beats and the bass playing was pretty much the same. It wasn't a lot of, it wasn't like I had to learn all these complicated arrangements like a jazz fusion tune or something. It was pretty much the complete opposite. But I made money doing it and I did have fun. Now, there was another scene that I got involved in as a result of those mainstream club scenes, which was the underground scene. Now, the underground scene was a little seedier, a little dirtier, harder drug use, and it was after hours. So when the Government, Comfort Zone, whatever would close and shut down, there would be another club not far from that same area of Toronto where they would open their doors at 6 a.m. and people would go to that club, continue partying and dancing or whatever. And sometimes we would finish at one club and then we would go and perform at an after hours club. And that was exhausting though. Those were really, really tiring gigs, especially when you're not energized because you're not doing any of the drug use that the people and that are in the audience are doing. We're not doing that. So I was surviving on coffee. That was my drug, drinking lots of coffee and switching from one club to another, and by 6:45, we would start up. Now, I didn't do that too often, the after hours, because it was kind of shady. There was, I don't know, I just didn't, even though it was a lot of young kids and they were there to party and stuff, they were more hardcore than the ones that were going to the Comfort Zone and Government and whatnot. Now, these kids were also going to the Comfort Zone and Government, but let's be honest, if you're going to party for days on end, sometimes these kids would go days doing this. Now, as a musician, I didn't do that. But I would get paid by whoever organized these after hour clubs. They would pay us really well. Again, some nights I would make as much as between the two places in one night, I would make like $500. Well, back in 1997, you made $500 in a night. That was good money. Now, mind you, I had to put a lot of hours in and it was exhausting, but I could do it because I was a young guy back then, 32, 33 years old. And I was making good money. Now, like I said, I didn't often do the underground gigs. I would mainly do the mainstream club gigs and they would shut down
We would usually shut down at 2 a.m. like a standard bar, you know. Now, the other thing is, I stayed away from the crowd in the sense that I never got caught up in that culture other than the musician side of it. I stayed away from a lot of those clubs other than performing. I mean, I went to the government, I went to the comfort zone as a patron. I think I went to all these clubs. This is London, Easy on the Fifth. I went to all of them as a patron, but it wasn't something that I did often because, let's be honest, I was working almost every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and at these clubs on Sunday most often as well. So I would be working and I would not be able to go to these clubs socially. I would be at the clubs, but I would be working. And it's a totally different thing. And to me, I treated it like a job. I showed up, I set my stuff up, we played our sets, I packed up, and I went home. Or, like I said, on occasion, I would go to the after hours clubs and perform at the after hours clubs too. But like I said, I really didn't care for those places too much because I found that there was just some really shady activities going on and it just wasn't my scene. I just ignored all of it because I was, like I said, just working, and I would pretty much just stay away from the club people and all that stuff. Now, I did have a good time, like I said. I stopped doing it around 2000 and late 2002, 2003, something like that. I stopped doing that. I just lost interest, and the scene started to die down. And I don't even know today if the scene still exists. If you guys are familiar, let me know. And what are the new clubs? I have no idea. Now, I did hear that the Comfort Zone is reopened in a different location, and I don't know if it's the same style of club as what it was back in the day, but I did, in doing a little bit of research for this video to remember the names of these clubs that I used to play at, I found out that the Comfort Zone is now reopened. Now, the government, I think, was the largest venue that we used to play at. And we didn't play there very often because it was mainly DJs, but that was probably the largest of all the venues. And I only ever played the Toronto scene. I never played anywhere outside of the Toronto scene. But I'll tell you, back in the day, the Toronto scene was a thriving and huge scene. So it paid the bills. What can I say? Anyways, guys, I'm not always proud of everything that I tell you guys in these videos, but I do like to share my experiences with you, and it's an interesting it was an interesting scene, no doubt about that, and it was big scene at the time. Anyways, guys, thank you very much to my new subscribers, and I want to thank anyone that has been reaching out to me with some really nice, great comments. I enjoy reading your comments, and I enjoy conversing with you guys. And I almost always return comments myself. When people comment on my channel, I always try to return a comment to that person. So anyways, thank you very much for watching. And as always, keep drumming. See ya.